Long before anyone made a window, long before mirrors, telescopes, or laboratory glass, a hunter is kneeling beside a dead animal. His hands are cold. The light is fading. And somewhere beyond the rocks, another animal is waiting for him to leave. He needs to work quickly. In his hand is a black stone. It isn't shaped like a knife. It has no handle, no polished surface, and no metal edge. It's just a broken piece of rock. But when he pulls it across the animal's hide, the skin opens almost instantly. No sawing, no crushing, just one smooth cut. The edge is so thin that even today, under the right conditions, volcanic glass can form a cutting surface finer than a steel blade. That's possible because obsidian breaks in smooth, curved fractures, rather than along the grain-like boundaries found in many crystalline materials. To the person holding it, though, none of that matters. He doesn't know about atoms. He doesn't know about volcanoes. He only knows that the black stone cuts better than anything else he has ever touched. And that makes this stone valuable. Valuable enough to carry across mountains. Valuable enough to cross open water for. Valuable enough to connect communities separated by enormous distances. This is where the story of glass begins. Not in a workshop, not inside a furnace, and not with an inventor. It begins with the earth making something humans couldn't. To understand obsidian, imagine thousands of people trying to find seats inside a giant feeder. If they're given enough time, everyone finds the correct row. The crowd becomes organized. There's a pattern. That's similar to what happens when many molten materials cool slowly. Their atoms have time to settle into an ordered, repeating structure. That structure is called a crystal. But now imagine the same crowd rushing into the theater, and suddenly the doors lock, the lights go out. Everyone freezes exactly where they are. Some people are standing in the aisles. Others are facing the wrong direction. Nobody reached the correct seat. That's roughly what happens when certain molten rock cools too quickly for crystals to form. The material becomes solid, but its internal arrangement remains disordered. That solid is glass. Obsidian is natural volcanic glass. It usually forms when silica-rich lava cools rapidly and crystallization is interrupted. In other words, obsidian is rock that never got the chance to properly organize itself. And that unfinished structure gives it an extraordinary ability. When ordinary crystalline stone breaks, the crack interacts with countless internal boundaries. The resulting edge may look sharp to us, but under magnification, it can appear rough and uneven. Obsidian behaves differently. With no large crystal pattern directing the crack, it can break along a smooth, curved surface called a conchoidal fracture. That curve can narrow into a terrifyingly fine edge. But there's a catch. The same structure that makes obsidian incredibly sharp also makes it fragile. It doesn't bend like metal. It doesn't forgive mistakes. Hit bone at the wrong angle, twist the blade, or use it to pry something open, and the edge may chip away immediately. Obsidian wasn't an ancient pocket knife. It was more like a precision instrument. Brilliant at one job, unreliable at almost everything else. Today, a sharper knife is convenient. For early humans, it could be the difference between eating and going hungry. An animal provided far more than meat. Its skin could become clothing or shelter. Tendons could become strong cord. Bones could become needles, points, or digging tools. Fat could provide calories and fuel. But first, all of those resources had to be separated. That was a cutting problem. A poor tool could tear a hide, leave meat attached to bone, or turn a short task into hours of exhausting work. And every extra minute mattered. A carcass attracted competition. Other predators didn't care who killed the animal. They cared about who was still standing beside it when they arrived. So a better cutting edge meant faster work. Faster work meant more usable food. It meant cleaner hides, better clothing, and less time exposed in the open. Over one day, that was useful. Over thousands of years, it could influence which groups survived difficult seasons and which ones didn't. But there was another problem. Most people didn't live beside an obsidian flow. If they wanted the best stone, they had to find another way to get it. Imagine discovering a perfect source of obsidian. You can't own the volcano, you can't manufacture more of the material, and you certainly can't carry the entire flow home. So you break off what you can carry. Some pieces become tools. Others become unfinished cores that can produce multiple blades later. Then you move. Perhaps your group carries the stone to its next camp. Perhaps you exchange a few pieces with another community. That community travels farther and trades it again. The people at the end of this chain may never meet the people who collected the obsidian. They may not even know where the volcano is. Yet the stone keeps moving. This is one reason obsidian matters so much to archaeologists. Different volcanic sources can contain different combinations of trace elements. By comparing an artifact's chemical signature with material from known sources, researchers can investigate where that artifact originated. A tiny flake can become a travel record. A broken tool can reveal a relationship between communities. And a piece of stone found far from its volcanic source can show that prehistoric people were connected across landscapes that once appeared isolated. Obsidian wasn't merely cutting animals. It was cutting paths between human groups. It encouraged movement, exchange, communication, and planning. A useful object had become something more. It had become part of an economy. Volcanoes weren't the only natural glass makers. Sometimes the sky joined in. During a thunderstorm, lightning can force an enormous amount of energy through a narrow path. If it strikes suitable sand or soil, that sudden heat may melt and fuse minerals around the strike channel. Then everything cools almost immediately. What remains can be a hollow, branching glass structure buried beneath the surface. It's called a fulgurite, and it can preserve part of the route taken by the electrical discharge. Think about finding one without knowing what electricity is. Last night, the sky exploded. The ground shook. A white line touched the earth for less than a heartbeat. Then, the next morning, you dig into the scorched ground and pull out a twisted glass shape. It wasn't there before the storm. Now it is. To us, it's geology and physics. To an ancient observer, it may have looked like a piece of the sky had been trapped underground. But even lightning isn't the most violent way nature can produce glass. For that, something has to arrive from much farther away. Across parts of the Great Sand Sea in western Egypt and eastern Libya, pieces of pale yellow glass can be found scattered across the desert. Some are surprisingly clear. Others look almost golden in sunlight. And they're ancient. The material commonly called Libyan desert glass formed roughly 29 million years ago during an extreme high-temperature event associated with a cosmic impact. Researchers have debated the precise details of that event and the location of its source structure. But impact-related evidence connects the glass to forces far beyond ordinary desert conditions. Something from space entered the story. The event delivered enough energy to transform surface material into glass. Then, the desert preserved pieces of it for millions of years. Much later, humans found them. Picture that journey. A person walks into one of the harshest environments on Earth. There are no stores, no roads, no machines. Only heat, distance, and sand. Then sunlight flashes from the ground. The person picks up a transparent yellow stone, unlike the ordinary rocks around it. They don't know that its story began millions of years before humans existed. They don't know that its creation involved an event from space. But they understand something important immediately. It's rare, it's beautiful, and someone powerful may want it. Natural glass had moved beyond survival. Now it could represent beauty, status, and mystery. By this point, people had seen glass made by volcanoes, lightning, and cosmic violence. But copying nature was a different problem. The main ingredient in most familiar glass is silica, commonly obtained from sand or quartz. Silica is everywhere.
That sounds helpful.
Unfortunately, pure silica requires temperatures above 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit to melt. Ancient fires couldn't simply reach that temperature because someone added more wood. Heat constantly escapes, and raising a furnace's temperature requires better insulation, concentrated fuel, and carefully controlled airflow. Humans had sand, they had fire, but the gap between those two things was enormous. The solution wasn't simply a hotter flame. The solution was changing the recipe. Certain substances act as fluxes. When added to silica, they lower the temperature needed to create a workable melt. Soda can bring that temperature down dramatically. Lime helps make the finished glass more durable and less vulnerable to water. Most everyday glass still relies on the basic partnership of silica, soda, and lime. Ancient glassmakers didn't need modern chemistry textbooks to discover this. They needed experimentation. Sand from one location might behave differently from sand collected somewhere else. Ash from burned plants could introduce useful chemicals. Minerals used to color pottery or process metal could change the final result. A furnace worker may have opened a chamber and found a strange glossy material among the ash, sand, minerals, and waste. Maybe it was blue, maybe green, maybe it was only a tiny bead stuck to the inside of a container. We don't know the identity of the first person who recognized deliberately produced glass, and the exact origin of glassmaking remains uncertain. What we do know is that fully glass objects were being produced in the ancient Near East by the 3rd millennium BCE, with early glass beads known from ancient Egypt, and glass industries later developing in Mesopotamia and Egypt. At first, glass wasn't an ordinary material. It was difficult to produce. It was colorful, rare, and precious. It didn't begin as the invisible window separating a person from the outside world. It began as treasure. Once humans learned to control glass, its purpose expanded. A bead became a vessel became a window became a lens. And lenses changed the scale of human sight. With microscopes, we found living worlds too small for our eyes. With telescopes, we studied objects so distant that their light had traveled for years, centuries, or longer before reaching us. Glass entered laboratories, hospitals, cameras, communication systems, homes, vehicles, and eventually the screens we touch every day. Different recipes produced different abilities. Borosilicate glass could handle changing temperatures. Optical glass could bend light with precision. Glass fibers could carry information as pulses of light. A material first discovered in broken volcanic stone eventually helped humanity study cells, map planets, and send information across continents. And the strangest part is that glass never stopped being what it was at the beginning, a solid with an internally disordered structure. A material caught between the arrangement of a liquid and the behavior of a solid. Nature made it accidentally. Humans found it, then traded it, then treasured it, then learned to reproduce it. And finally, we used it to look back at nature itself. So the next time you stare through a window, glance into a mirror, or touch a glass screen, remember what you're actually touching. Not just melted sand, not just a transparent wall. You're touching the modern version of a mystery that began inside volcanoes, flashed into existence beneath lightning, and appeared in deserts after violence from space. Glass didn't begin as a human invention. It began as a message. The Earth had already made the material. We just had to learn how to read it.